In this video, I'm going to show you how the new GPT 4.5 model from OpenAI thinks. I will compare it to the other models from OpenAI, such as GPT-4 and o1 Pro, also in deep research mode, and I will show you how the structure of the answer that you get from all those models is different and how it reveals actually their thinking process. And that will be really helpful for you to choose which use cases to use them for. We'll be using the versions of these models that are available in ChatGPT, and in order to analyze the output and their thinking process, I will use the app that I developed that's called Infranodus, that you can see right now on your screen, that visualizes any text as a knowledge graph, shows you the main ideas, how they connect to one another, reveals the topical structure underneath, shows you what are the main clusters of ideas, how they relate to one another, what are the gaps. So you can really use this information to understand the thinking process that the model is using, and also to estimate the relevancy and the quality of the answers that you get. So I will show you how you can also apply it to any other answer, and how you can even use this browser extension from Infranodus in order to steer the model in an interesting direction. So let's get right into it. First, I have the ChatGPT 4.5 model open here, and I just asked it, how does deep research mode work in AI? And here's the answer I got. It's pretty short. It was also fast. And when I visualize it using the Infranodus browser extension that also works in ChatGPT, I can see that it's quite a coherent graph. It's very interconnected. You have the main topics such as AI, information, databases, so it gives you like a really good structure. When I ask the same question to 4.0 model, I actually get a much more dispersed graph. So it still focuses on the concept of AI, but as you can see, the ideas that it's giving are much more dispersed. And that can be a good thing if you want to get a more diverse answer, but also, as you can see, it's kind of fragmented. So if you want something a bit more coherent for this kind of short answers, it looks like ChatGPT 4.5 model is better. I actually tried it on a few queries, and it always came out with these consistent results, that it just focuses on a few main topics and kind of tries to elaborate on them. You can actually clearly see this if you go into deep research mode. So here I have the results from the deep research mode. I actually asked the same question, as you can see here. How does deep research mode work? And then it asked me one clarifying question, and then it took about 5 minutes and then provided this long answer. If you don't know how deep research mode works, this is basically it. It kind of goes on the internet here, and you can see the process, actually the thinking process behind it in the right tab, and it goes and searches for this information online. It reasons with itself, so you can also kind of trace how it's been thinking about a certain topic, and then once it collected all the results it needs, then it gives you an output. So that usually takes 5 minutes with 4.5, and if you use o1 Pro model here, then it takes about 10 minutes for me most of the time. So also 4.5 is faster. And now let's compare also the results that it's giving us. So when you open the Infranodus extension, you can actually wait until you have the answer produced here by the 4.5 model, and then you click on the extension button and you choose to analyze page content. I'll also show you how you can analyze the thinking process of the model. So that's also very interesting, because you can actually see how the model is thinking. But first we'll analyze the output. So here 4.5 output, as you can see, the results are really focused on the topic of research, AI, and information. This is kind of like the main informational pathways in this response. And then the model is kind of talking about some other stuff. And also the structure of the answer is biased. So it has not so much diversity. It kind of focused on the main topics, that this deep research mode is used by AI to provide relevant information. So this is why those ideas are very relevant here. And if you look at the topics, it's also talking about research insights, data trends. So I can see that, okay, it's talking about how data is used to augment the query and then to provide more precise results. Actually, if I click on the context here, I can see which statements exactly relate to this topic. So this is also why it's kind of nice to use Infranodus to navigate through the answers that the model provides. But basically, as you can see here, it focuses a bit more on the technicalities of how it works. Whereas if I analyze this response provided by o1 model, o1 Pro mode here, in fact, the same response, as you can see, it's a bit more diverse. So there's less focus on research, AI, information. These are still the main topics. I can actually click on them to see what they're connected to. But there is also many more other clusters, and also the diversity of this text is higher, 48%. Whereas in this case, we had 33%. So that means that the response that you get with O1 model is more diverse, and that can be interesting for you if you want a wider range of responses, for instance. So what I can see here is that 4.5 produces much more biased and focused responses that will just focus on what you basically asked and try to generate a response that's related to it. But if you want a creative response, in fact, I think that O1 Pro is still better. And it's kind of funny because they advertise 4.5 as something that's good for writing and exploring ideas, but in fact, I find that O1 is better in providing creative responses. But the problem with O1 is that once you generate one response, if you want to use it again, it's not possible. I don't know why. So then you have to keep on using O3 Mini, or then you can use 4.5 to maybe focus on some ideas. So that could be an interesting workflow to use. If you want a creative response, first go with O1 Pro, and then go into GPT 4.5 to then elaborate on this answer further. What's also quite interesting is that if we look at the main topics that were generated by 4.5, we can see that 77% of all influence is in the research insights that you can get through this mode, and then data trends. So this more technical aspect of how it collects data and how it processes user query. Whereas the answer that we got in O1 is actually very different, because here we have the main topics that are talking about the different use cases and applications of how it works. And in fact, when I ran this query several times and made it more specific, I still found that O1 model was producing a much diverse range of responses. So it would touch upon the use cases and the technology, for example, like it does here, right? It's talking about how it's used in investigative journalism, for instance, and in experimental design and so on, and in legal intelligence. But 4.5 model will really be focused on the question itself and maybe kind of talk about the concepts around it, but it will not detour too much into other topics. So that can also be quite an interesting insight. If you just want a focused response, 4.5 can be better. If you want a more creative response, then O1 Pro mode can be more interesting. So that can also be something that will make you decide on which model to use for your particular use case. Another thing that I want to demonstrate is that you can actually analyze the thinking process of the model. So that's very interesting, because both models, when they're in the deep research mode, they have this option that you can actually see the research itself. So if you click here, research completed, then it will show you like a tab on the right that shows you how the model was thinking. And then in the Infranodus extension, you can actually use to analyze model's thoughts. And then when you click generate, then it's going to visualize not the actual answer here, but the model's chain of thought. And that's really great, because you can also observe how the model was thinking, what it was thinking about. So for example, in the case of 4.5, you see that it was focusing a lot on research, ChatGPT. Then it was talking about OpenAI, Perplexity, so kind of like searching other tools also, and then also looking at some screenshots, infographics, diagrams, and so on. So this is kind of like the processes it actually went through. And if you click on the trends, then you can actually trace also how this thinking process evolved over time. So it's quite interesting, because you can see how the topics evolved. Like it first kind of started with the smaller ideas, going into some specific searches, such as for example, asking about reasoning and retrieval and data, and going on Perplexity and other sites. And then it kind of came back to the final answer. And then it used all this information to produce the final result for you, right? So as we can see, it kind of picks some bits and pieces from different sources, still related to the main idea, but slightly around it, so to say. And then it provides somehow like a connection to the main topic, and then it produces the final result, which is really focused on the main topic, which is research AI in this case. But in the O1 mode, when I run the same analysis of the model's thinking process, I get different results, because again, the thinking process is much more diverse than in the case of 4.5, because here we have diversity bias, so it's really focused on one idea, research, and 48%, that's lower. And here we have 57% optimal diversity. So actually the thinking process of O1 was much more diverse. It wasn't focused on just one idea. It was trying to touch upon the different subjects and topics which were related to the query. So I like that more because that means to me that it's covering a bigger territory of ideas. And then as a result, I can see that it produced a much more interconnected structure in its thinking process, which it then uses to provide the answer. So for me, I would trust this a little bit more, especially if I want to learn about a topic that I don't yet know so much about, for instance. I think I would trust that because it would really enable me to see all the different parts of this domain and then to kind of zoom into them if I want some more insights. And also what I can see here in how the thought evolved over time, right? Like, as you can see, it's much more diverse. It touches upon different topics. It still starts from smaller concepts and then goes into the bigger ones. So this is maybe something that's more general for all of their deep reasoning flows, that they will first touch upon some smaller ideas that belong to it and then kind of finalize and connect everything to the main ones. But as you can see, still the diversity here is much more because, for example, one topic becomes bigger, like here Creative Commons, then becomes smaller again, then it's more about visual analysis. So here it shows you how the topics actually evolved, and you can see that the visual analysis topic was more towards the end, and the Creative Commons one was more towards kind of like the second half, whereas here, when the model was thinking about this, you see there was one topic on visual explanations that came up also, by the way, but then the main one was AI accuracy that went throughout the whole reasoning process, right? So it's almost like it chose something general it's going to focus on, and then it touched upon bits and pieces in 4.5, but it wasn't so much trying to focus on the diversity of the response, whereas here it actually did that. So this I find quite interesting because it really shows me once again that this thinking process is also much more diverse. And by the way, another thing that is very interesting that you can do is you actually can remove the top nodes. So if I go back to the final answer provided by the model, I can actually say, okay, I know it's about research and information and AI, so I'm going to remove those nodes from the graph and see what else it's talking about. So when I remove those nodes, in the 4.5 case, as you can see, there's a very dispersed structure. It's still biased because it's still focused on very specific ideas, but somehow there's a lot of really small ones, but they all connected to the main ones that we removed. Whereas in this case, if I go into the final answer of the O1 model and I remove also research AI, actually let me choose it here. I will choose research AI and information, remove them from the graph, then the graph is recalculated to show me what's hiding underneath. So it's a very good approach to understand what are the latent topics. Here I can see that there is much more on data journalism. There's a whole cluster here, for instance, on data journalism, on investigative journalism, and then I can see another one, the orange one here, on supply chain, for instance. So you see it kind of went into the different islands of topics and explored them in more detail. Whereas in 4.5, there was not so much exploration in each of those topics. Like it touched upon some concepts, but you see mainly it's focused on this idea of data query and kind of like how you can improve the query, so on the technical aspect of how this whole thing works. But even if it touched upon some topics such as academic resources, for instance, or policy accuracy, they're much smaller, they have less influence, so they're not as prominent here, and that kind of shows once again that once you remove the main concepts, the actual answer is a bit poor in quality, I would say. Whereas here, you actually have a really rich data still underneath, so that I also like. And then, for instance, if I would like to explore more what it's talking about algorithmic bias, which seems to be a big topic in the answer of the O1 model, I can zoom in here and then click on the context, and then I can see where it's talking about this algorithmic bias, all the different statements in the answer that belong to that, or I can also summarize them using actually the GPT itself. and say how the transformer model algorithms like GPT enhance natural language understanding through reasoning and reinforcement learning. It emphasizes the importance of diversifying sources for AI-driven research. So it's telling us itself that it's important to diversify the sources in AI-driven research in the 01 answer, but in the 4.5 answer, it's not talking about diversification, and it's also not doing that so much. So I think, yeah, if you consider the price of both models, to me, I would keep on using 01 Pro mode, because if you connect to it through API, 4.5 is very expensive. But I think for ChatGPT users, I'm not sure if they made it available to everyone or only to those who are on the Pro subscription. But if it's possible, I would always use 01 Pro mode, because I know the answer will be more diverse, and it's even telling me itself here how it's focusing on removing the bias. Whereas here, it seems to be that it's focusing more on the technicalities and kind of trying to provide a very precise answer to the query, but if the query is biased, then you will not get a very diverse response. So this is it. I hope that you will find this information useful, and you can also run this analysis on your own ChatGPT conversations using the Infranodus AI Chrome extension plugin. And once you visualize information like this, you can see the main topics inside, also identify the gaps, and then use those gaps, for example, to generate interesting prompts for the model that you can feed back into the conversation, and then have it develop it more in the direction that would make it cover a bigger territory and also bridge the gaps that are not yet bridged. And if you have any questions, please let me know and I will be happy to answer. Thank you.